Quinton Orlov pushed open the heavy glass doors, stepping into the sleek, modern lobby only to realize, almost instantly, that something was off. His sharp gaze swept the space, taking in the outdated furniture, the buzzing fluorescent lights, and the small reception desk that looked nothing like the high-end investment firm he was supposed to be meeting with. This wasn't the right building. He exhaled, irritated, and pulled out his phone to check the address again. Just as he was about to turn around and leave, a voice caught his attention. "Can I help you?" He looked up and froze. Behind the front desk stood a woman, not just any woman, she was stunning. Dark curls framed her delicate features, and her deep brown eyes held a quiet confidence that made it impossible for him to look away. She wasn't wearing designer clothes or expensive jewelry, yet somehow she carried herself with an effortless grace that made her more captivating than any socialite he'd ever met. For a man who had built a billion-dollar empire, who had sat in rooms with the most powerful people in the world, Quinton had never been caught off guard before. But this woman, she had him speechless. He cleared his throat, forcing himself to regain his composure. "I think I'm in the wrong building." She gave him a small, knowing smile. "That would explain why you look so lost." He should have been annoyed at her teasing tone, but instead he found himself intrigued. "What is this place?" he asked, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "This is Haven Community Center," she said, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "We run programs for kids, job training for adults, and a few other things to help people get back on their feet." Quinton arched a brow. "Not exactly an investment firm." "No," she laughed softly. "But I'd argue what we do here is just as important." There was something about the way she spoke, so passionate, so sure of herself, that made Quinton hesitate. He had places to be, deals to close, and yet he didn't want to leave. "What's your name?" he asked. "Zariah Sullivan." Zariah. It suited her, unique, strong, unforgettable. "Well, Zariah," he said, leaning slightly against the desk, "since I'm already here, maybe you can give me a tour." She blinked, clearly surprised. "A tour? Unless you have somewhere else to be," he said smoothly. She studied him for a moment, as if trying to figure out why a man in a custom-tailored suit, wearing a watch worth more than this entire building, would want a tour of a community center. But then she shrugged. "All right, Mr. Wrong Building. Follow me." As she led him through the center, Quinton found himself more and more intrigued. The place was small, but it was filled with life. Kids were laughing in a playroom, volunteers were teaching people how to write resumes, and there was even a small kitchen where meals were being prepared for families in need. Zariah spoke about each program with such warmth, such dedication, that Quinton couldn't help but admire her. She wasn't just working here, she cared, deeply. "So," she said as they walked back toward the entrance, "do you accidentally wander into a lot of buildings, or am I just lucky?" He chuckled. "Just this once." "Well, I hope it wasn't a complete waste of your time." He looked at her, really looked at her. "Not at all." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was charged, something unspoken but undeniable lingering between them. Quinton knew he should leave. He had a meeting to get to, a world to run. But something about this woman, this place, made him hesitate. "Would you let me take you to dinner?" he asked. Zariah's eyes widened slightly. "Dinner? That's usually what people do when they're interested in someone," he said, his lips curving into a small smile. She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You don't even know me. I'd like to change that." She studied him again, as if searching for any sign that he was just another rich guy looking for a distraction, but all she saw was sincerity. After a moment, she exhaled, as if coming to a decision. "All right, Mr. Wrong Building. One dinner." Quinton felt an unfamiliar sense of satisfaction settle in his chest. Something told him this was only the beginning. Quinton Orlov wasn't used to waiting. In his world, time was the most valuable currency, and he spent it wisely on high-stakes deals, exclusive events, and power plays that kept his empire thriving. But as he stood outside the quiet little cafe Zariah had picked for their dinner, he realized something unsettling. He wasn't impatient. He wasn't checking his watch or thinking about the countless emails piling up in his inbox. He was looking forward to this. When the door swung open and she stepped out of the evening breeze, he had to remind himself to keep breathing. Gone was the casual, work-ready appearance she'd had at the community center. Now she was wearing a soft, elegant dress that skimmed just above her knees, her dark curls cascading over her shoulders. There was no extravagant jewelry, no designer labels, but she was the most captivating woman in the room. "You're early," she noted as she approached. "I'm never late," he replied, holding the door open for her. The café was unlike the places he usually frequented. No private dining areas, no Michelin-starred chefs, no discreet waitstaff catering to every whim. It was warm, intimate, filled with soft chatter and the scent of freshly baked bread. It suited her. As they settled at their table, Zariah studied him with an amused expression. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who eats at places like this." "I'm not," he met her gaze, "but I wanted to see where you'd take me." She tilted her head slightly, intrigued. "And I'm beginning to think you have good taste." The corner of her lips lifted in quiet satisfaction. "Well, I do spend a lot of time convincing kids not to eat cereal for dinner, so I'd like to think so." He chuckled, a rare thing for him. It had been a long time since someone had spoken to him like this, with easy confidence, without the weight of expectations or ulterior motives. He wasn't sure he hated it. The conversation flowed effortlessly, veering from their vastly different upbringings to the quirks of the people they encountered in everyday life. She spoke about the community center the way most people spoke about their dreams, with conviction, with a fire that made it impossible not to listen. "You don't just work there," he noted after she finished telling him about a recent program she'd helped launch. "You believe in it." "Of course I do," she said without hesitation. "I've seen what a place like that can do for people, for kids who think they don't have a future, for families who need a second chance. Someone has to fight for them." There was no pretension in her words, no self-righteousness, just truth. And for the first time in years, Quinton found himself wondering what it would be like to care about something that deeply. "You're used to people who only look out for themselves, aren't you?" she asked, studying him. "I deal with billion-dollar contracts and boardrooms full of men who would sell their own mothers for a better deal," he admitted. "So yes," she shook her head, a knowing look in her eyes. "That sounds exhausting." He exhaled a quiet laugh. "It has its moments." Their meals arrived, and as they ate, the conversation turned more personal. He learned that she had grown up in the city, that she had once dreamed of becoming a journalist before realizing she wanted to do something more hands-on. She learned that he had built his empire from the ground up, that he had walked away from a family who had never believed he could make something of himself. There was something disarming about her presence. She asked questions no one else dared to, and when he answered, he didn't feel the usual need to guard his words. As the evening stretched on, he found himself reluctant to end it. But eventually they stepped outside, the cool night air wrapping around them. "Thank you for dinner," she said, looking up at him. "I have to admit I wasn't sure what to expect." And, her lips curved slightly, "I think you might surprise me, Quinton Orlov." Something about the way she said his name sent a slow, unexpected warmth through his chest. "I'd like to see you again," he said, the words coming easier than he expected. She hesitated, not out of disinterest, but as if weighing the implications of what this could be. "All right," she finally said. "One more dinner." He smiled, a rare, genuine one. Something told him that one more dinner wouldn't be enough, not even close. Quinton hadn't planned on seeing Zariah again so soon, but something about her was magnetic, pulling him in despite every logical reason to stay away. He had spent years keeping his personal life separate from the world he ruled, but she had slipped through the cracks of his carefully constructed life with nothing more than a quiet confidence and a natural warmth that he couldn't ignore. So when his car pulled up in front of the community center 2 nights later, he wasn't surprised that he was here. What surprised him was how much he wanted to be. Inside, the place was buzzing with energy. Volunteers moved with purpose. Kids ran through the halls laughing, and in the middle of it all stood Zariah, clipboard in hand, directing people with effortless ease. She didn't see him at first, too focused on solving some issue near the donation area. "I don't know how we're going to make this work," a woman beside her said, sounding exasperated. "We're short on supplies and the event is in 2 days." Zariah pressed her lips together, thinking, "We'll find a way." "We always do." Quinton stepped forward, and for the first time in years he made a decision purely on impulse. "What do you need?" Zariah turned, startled. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she recovered. "Quinton, what are you doing here?" He ignored the question. "Tell me what you need for the event." She hesitated, as if trying to decide whether to indulge him or brush him off. Eventually, she sighed. "We're hosting a fundraising dinner. We were promised supplies, but they fell through last minute." "We need tables, chairs, food. Consider it done," he said without hesitation. Zariah blinked. "What? I'll handle it." The woman standing beside her looked between them, clearly confused. "Zariah, who is this?" She hesitated before answering. "A friend." Quinton didn't flinch at the word, though he noted the way she said it carefully, as if unsure of what he really was to her. The woman gave him a wary look before turning back to Zariah. "If he can actually pull this off, I won't ask questions." She walked off, leaving them alone. Zariah crossed her arms. "You don't have to do this." "I know," she exhaled, clearly torn. "I don't want you to think I expect anything from you." "I don't." His tone was firm, "but I have resources. If I can help, I will." She studied him, as if trying to figure out why a man like him would involve himself in something so far removed from his world. But instead of questioning it further, she simply nodded. "Okay." Quinton pulled out his phone and made a single call. Within minutes, his assistant had arranged for everything they needed: catering, furniture, even decorations. Zariah listened as he handled it with effortless efficiency. When he finally put his phone away, she shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. "You just made a problem we've been stressing over for weeks disappear in less than 5 minutes." He shrugged. "That's what I do." She let out a quiet laugh, and for some reason, the sound settled something inside him. That night, Quinton stayed longer than he intended, watching as Zariah moved through the center, solving problems, offering comfort, making people feel seen. He had spent years surrounded by people who only cared about power, money, and control. Yet here she was, proving that true influence wasn't about wealth, it was about impact. When she finally sat beside him on one of the worn-out benches near the entrance, she exhaled, tired but content. "You didn't have to stay." "I wanted to." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're an enigma, Quinton Orlov." He tilted his head slightly. "How so?" "I thought I had you figured out," she admitted. "Rich, powerful, used to getting what you want, but then you do things like this and I don't know what to make of you." He considered her words before replying. "Maybe I don't know what to make of myself when I'm around you." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something shifted between them. The air grew heavier, charged with something deeper than curiosity, more intense than simple attraction. For the first time in years, Quinton felt like he wasn't just a man with a billion-dollar empire. He was just a man. A man who wanted to know what would happen if he let himself fall. But before either of them could say anything more, a voice called out from inside. "Zariah, we need you for a second." She hesitated, clearly torn, but Quinton gave her a small nod. "Go." She stood, pausing for a moment before adding softly, "See you at the fundraiser." He met her gaze. "You will." As she disappeared inside, Quinton leaned back against the bench, exhaling slowly. He hadn't planned on falling into this world. But now that he was here, he had no intention of leaving. The night of the fundraiser arrived, and Quinton Orlov was a man who had seen the most extravagant events across the world: gala openings in Paris, exclusive yacht parties in Monaco, private charity auctions where the bidding started at $1 million. Yet, as he stepped into the transformed community center, something about this evening felt different, more significant. The space had been completely reimagined. Soft golden lights strung across the ceiling cast a warm glow over the room. Tables were dressed in crisp white linens, adorned with delicate floral arrangements that made the entire atmosphere feel intimate rather than ostentatious. Volunteers bustled around, guiding well-dressed donors to their seats, their faces filled with anticipation. And then he saw her. Zariah. She stood near the stage, speaking with a group of guests, her presence commanding without effort. She was wearing a deep navy dress, understated yet elegant, a quiet kind of beauty that outshone even the most dazzling displays of wealth. But it wasn't just how she looked, it was the way she moved, the way she engaged with people, the way her entire being radiated purpose. Quinton had spent years around people who built empires, but Zariah, she built something far more powerful: hope. She turned then, as if sensing him, and their eyes met across the room. For a moment, the chaos of the event, the noise, the movement, it all faded. There was only her. She made her way toward him, her expression unreadable. "You actually came," he arched a brow. "You thought I wouldn't," she studied him, as if debating her next words. "I wasn't sure." He leaned in slightly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "You should know by now, Zariah, I don't make promises I don't intend to keep." Something flickered in her eyes, something deep, something unspoken. But before she could respond, someone called her name and she exhaled softly. "I have to make a speech," she said, almost reluctantly. "I'll be watching." She hesitated, then turned and walked toward the stage, leaving Quinton standing alone, hands in his pockets, watching as she took her place at the podium. The room quieted as she began to speak. "We built this place on the belief that no one should be left behind," she said, her voice steady, filled with conviction. "That no matter where you come from, no matter what struggles you face, you deserve a chance to learn, to grow, to build a future. And tonight, because of all of you, we are one step closer to making that future possible." Applause erupted, but Quinton barely heard it. He was too busy watching her, watching the way she held herself, watching the fire in her eyes as she spoke about the people she fought for. And for the first time in his life, he realized something staggering. All the wealth, the power, the influence, it meant nothing if he didn't have something worth fighting for. And Zariah, she was worth everything. As the evening progressed, he saw her moving from table to table, engaging with guests, ensuring that everything ran smoothly. She was in her element, and yet, every time their eyes met across the room, there was something there, something tethering them together, something unshakable. When the final donation was counted, when the last guest had departed, when the space emptied until only a handful of volunteers remained, Quinton found himself standing outside with her beneath the glow of the streetlights. She sighed, rubbing her arms lightly against the cool night air. "We did it." "You did it," he corrected. She glanced at him, a slow smile tugging at her lips. "You helped." "I did," he admitted, "and I don't intend to stop." She frowned slightly, as if trying to decipher his meaning. "Quinton, I want to be part of this," he said, cutting her off. "Not just tonight, not just with donations, I want to be part of what you're building here." Her breath hitched slightly, her eyes searching his. "Why?" He took a step closer, his voice low, steady. "Because you make me want to be better. Because I've spent years chasing power, and for the first time I want something more. I want something real." She swallowed hard, her fingers curling slightly, as if resisting the urge to reach for him. "Quinton." He didn't let her look away. "Tell me you don't feel it too." She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering her thoughts before finally meeting his gaze again. "I do." Relief surged through him, but he wasn't done. "Then don't fight it." She exhaled a shaky breath. "This is dangerous territory. You and me, we come from different worlds." "I don't care," he said, his voice firm. "I'll cross whatever world I have to if it means being with you." She let out a soft laugh, shaking her head. "You say that like it's easy." "Maybe it is," he countered. "Maybe when something feels this right, we don't need to overthink it." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, then, finally, she whispered, "You're impossible, Quinton Orlov." But she didn't pull away when he reached for her hand. And when he leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a slow, deliberate kiss, she didn't resist. She melted into him, into the warmth, into the certainty of what they had found. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his voice a quiet promise. "This is just the beginning, Zariah." And for the first time in a long time, neither of them had any doubts. Quinton Orlov had made million-dollar deals in less time than it took for Zariah to agree to a second date. And yet, standing outside the community center with her hand still resting lightly in his, he realized there was nothing in his empire that compared to the quiet weight of this moment. He had spent years mastering control of his business, his image, and every aspect of his carefully structured life. But Zariah, she unraveled that control with nothing more than her presence, her unwavering belief in the kind of world he had long thought impossible. She pulled back slightly, her gaze searching his face, as if trying to piece together what exactly she was supposed to do with a man like him. "You have a whole universe out there, Quinton. A world full of power and ambition. I'm not sure where I fit in that." He studied her carefully, knowing that for someone like her, someone who had spent her life fighting for people who had nothing, the idea of his world must have seemed overwhelming. "Maybe you don't fit into it," he admitted. "Maybe I fit into yours." Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard by his words, but before she could respond, a voice called from inside the center, reminding her that the night wasn't over just yet. She hesitated, glancing back toward the entrance before looking at him again. "I have to finish up here," she said. He nodded, releasing her hand. "I'll wait." She gave him a long look before finally turning and stepping back inside, disappearing into the warmth of the place that had become her entire world. For the first time in years, Quinton wasn't thinking about his next move. He wasn't thinking about strategy or control. He was thinking about her, and for once, that was enough. By the time Zariah emerged from the building again, the streetlights cast a soft glow over the quiet evening. The city had settled into a late-night lull, and the last of the volunteers had already gone home. She stopped when she saw him still waiting, leaning against the sleek black car that had been idling at the curb. "You didn't have to stay." He pushed off the car, stepping toward her. "I wanted to." She studied him for a moment before exhaling a quiet laugh, shaking her head like she wasn't sure what to do with him. "You're impossible." "And yet, here we are," he said, his voice laced with something lighter, something teasing. Her expression softened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she glanced down the empty street, as if realizing how late it had gotten. "I should head home. I'll take you." She hesitated, but before she could refuse, he opened the car door for her, waiting. After a small pause, she sighed and slid inside. The drive through the city was quiet, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but rather something that existed in the space of two people who were still trying to figure out what exactly this was. When they finally pulled up in front of her building, a modest, brick apartment complex tucked into a quieter part of town, she turned to him, her fingers resting lightly on the handle of the door. "Quinton." She started, but then stopped, as if unsure what she even wanted to say. He watched her carefully, sensing the hesitation, the cautious wall she was still holding up. "Whatever it is, just say it." She shifted in her seat, exhaling slowly. "This, you and me, it's not going to be simple." His gaze didn't waver. "I don't need simple, I need real." A flicker of something unreadable crossed her face before she finally nodded, almost to herself. Then, before she could overthink it, she leaned in, pressing a soft, fleeting kiss against his cheek, a whisper of something unspoken, something unfinished. Then she pulled back, fingers curling around the door handle. "Good night, Quinton." She was gone before he could respond, disappearing into the dimly lit entrance of her building. Quinton sat there for a long moment, watching the spot where she had stood, before finally exhaling and pulling away from the curb. Something told him this was only the beginning. The next week passed in a blur of late-night phone calls, quiet conversations, and stolen moments in between their vastly different worlds. Quinton found himself slipping away from boardrooms and high-stakes negotiations just to catch a glimpse of Zariah's world. He stopped by the center at odd hours, offering solutions to problems she hadn't even had time to voice yet. New books for the after-school programs, updated computers for job training classes, things that seemed so simple in his world but made all the difference in hers. Zariah resisted at first, stubborn in her independence, but over time, she stopped pushing him away. And before either of them could fully acknowledge it, he had become part of the community center in a way no one had expected. "You're different," she admitted one evening as they sat on the worn-down steps of the center after closing. "Different how?" She tilted her head, studying him in the dim glow of the streetlights. "I think you actually care about this place." His jaw tightened slightly because he knew she was right. What had started as an accidental detour had turned into something he hadn't planned on. He cared, more than he should, more than he was probably ready to admit. "I care about you," he said finally. Her breath hitched slightly, but she didn't look away. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she whispered, "I care about you too." And just like that, the last remaining walls between them crumbled. The weeks that followed were a blur of something neither of them had expected. Late-night conversations, quiet moments stolen in between responsibilities, the kind of connection that didn't need grand declarations to feel real. But the world had a way of testing even the strongest of foundations. And when Quinton's name ended up splashed across headlines, his company embroiled in a high-profile corporate scandal that he hadn't seen coming, he realized that the world he had spent years building was about to collide with Zariah's in a way that neither of them could ignore. Because now, it wasn't just his reputation on the line. It was theirs. Quinton Orlov had spent his entire career handling crises, manipulating the media, and ensuring that no scandal ever touched him long enough to leave a mark. He had built an empire on control, on power, on knowing exactly how to maneuver through any storm. But this was different. Because now, for the first time, he wasn't just protecting his company or his reputation. He was protecting something more, someone more. Zariah. The news had broken in waves, flooding headlines, whispered in hushed tones at high-end restaurants and behind closed doors in boardrooms. A former associate of his company had been caught in a financial scheme, one that had nothing to do with Quinton himself, but the connection was enough to send the media frenzy into overdrive. His name was everywhere. His company was under scrutiny. And worst of all, the community center, Zariah's world, was being dragged into the chaos by association. She hadn't called him, but he knew she was feeling the weight of it, so he went to her. When he arrived at the center, she was outside, standing near the entrance, her arms crossed as she spoke with one of the volunteers. Her expression was tense, but not panicked. She wasn't the kind of woman to crumble under pressure. When she spotted him, her gaze sharpened, and she excused herself from the conversation, walking toward him with measured steps. "I was wondering when you'd show up," she said, her voice even. Quinton took in the subtle lines of strain around her eyes, the way she held herself just a little too rigidly. "You should have called me." "I figured you had enough to deal with," she replied. "Your company, your investors, your reputation? I don't care about any of that," he cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I care about you." Something flickered in her expression, a softness that she quickly masked with practicality. "The center's been getting calls. People asking if we're involved in whatever's happening with your company." "They're not," he said firmly, "and I won't let them be." She studied him for a long moment, as if deciding whether or not to believe him. "I don't want what we've built here to become collateral damage, Quinton." "It won't," he assured her. "I'll make sure of it." She exhaled, rubbing a hand over her forehead before lowering her gaze. "This is what your world is like, isn't it? Scandals, accusations, constant scrutiny. He didn't deny it. It's part of it. She lifted her eyes to his again. I don't know if I can live in that world. The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Quinton felt something cold settle in his chest. Are you saying you want to walk away? She hesitated, as if the thought had crossed her mind, but then she shook her head. No, I don't know how to do this. He stepped closer, his presence steady, unwavering. Then let me show you. She searched his face, and whatever she saw there must have reassured her because she slowly nodded. Okay. That was all he needed. He spent the next 72 hours making sure the media storm died down. He called in every favor, met with every legal team, and ensured that the narrative was controlled. The associate responsible for the scandal was publicly cut from any affiliation with his company, and Quinton issued a rare personal statement, making it clear that neither he nor any of his business partners had any connection to the financial scheme. But more importantly, he made sure Zariah and the community center were left out of it entirely. When the dust finally settled, when the headlines moved on to their next target, he returned to her. This time, when he arrived at the center, she was waiting for him. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. You fixed it. I told you I would. She studied him for a long moment before stepping closer. This is what you do, isn't it? You don't just navigate storms, you control them. He tilted his head slightly. Does that scare you? She shook her head. No, it makes me wonder how lonely it must have been before now. His breath caught slightly because she was right. It had been lonely. Until her. He reached for her, his fingers brushing against hers before he fully took her hand. Not anymore. She let out a soft breath, her shoulders finally relaxing. No, she agreed. Not anymore. And then she rose onto her toes, wrapping her arms around his neck, and kissed him. It wasn't a hesitant kiss or one filled with uncertainty. It was a kiss that spoke of decisions made, of paths chosen. A kiss that told him she wasn't walking away. When they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers and murmured, "Marry me." Her breath hitched, her eyes widening slightly. "Quinton, I mean it," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want to wait. I don't want to waste any more time pretending like this isn't the most important thing in my life. You are." She exhaled a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You don't do anything halfway, do you?" "Never." He cupped her face, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "Say yes." She searched his eyes, and then finally she whispered, "Yes." A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face before he kissed her again, sealing the promise between them. Weeks later, in an intimate ceremony surrounded by the people who mattered most, they said their vows. There was no grand spectacle, no media frenzy, just them. Zariah, radiant in a dress that wasn't about extravagance but elegance, stood before him with a look in her eyes that told him he had found something far greater than power. And Quinton, for the first time in his life, knew with absolute certainty that he had made the greatest deal of all. Not one built on contracts or negotiations, but one built on love, and this was forever.